Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this is 272 episodes from World Talent Economy Forums. And we have our special episode on genetic engineering. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Fred Philip. He's the chief of Tando. Tando is a global think tank, and they are doing very interesting work around the world with their lot of research and consultings and academic activities. As well as we have our new friends. He's very energetic, very positive, Mr. Aaron. He when I just invite him, he support World Talent Economy Forum initiative, and always our best professor who's supporting World Talent Economy Forum in many ways, Professor Donald. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I want to start from Professor Fred Philip. Professor, how do you want to analyze today's thing, genetic engineering? And most important thing is that from Asia Pacific, our target is developing nations like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, country like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Genetic engineering is very important in COVID-19 situations. What your analysis, how these countries can implement this genetic engineering, and especially they can collaborate with developing nations for genetic engineering?
I see many aspects of the genetic engineering question. You were talking before the broadcast began about genetically modified seeds and crops. That's one area of discussion here. Another is genetic therapies, and these are all controversial, and they're controversial for good reason. Still another area is the genetic manipulation of embryos. And, you know, my connection with genetics and genetic engineering is indirect. It was by no means my major, but as you know, I was for many years the editor of a journal on technology assessment that covered many areas of technology, including biotech and genetic technologies. I've had email exchanges with Dr. Doudna, who is now a Nobel laureate, and I've met her co-awardee, Professor Charpentier, at an event at Merck in Germany. And my daughter's law firm handles many of the fundamental patents in the area, including some that are held by Professor Doudna. So in terms of technology assessment, and this is more my area of expertise than the fundamental biology, I have found articles that debunk the Indian farmer suicide stories. The debunking articles have not been convincing to me. That's all I can say. I haven't investigated it firsthand. But those stories do bring to light the fact that genetically based crops, when people say they are okay, what they're really saying is that if you swallow them, they will not kill you immediately, and they might not even kill you soon. But these are comments that address only the very direct effects of the GM crops. So in technology assessment, we always want to look at the second and third order effects of such things. And, you know, the fact that Indian farmers are talked into borrowing money to get these more expensive seeds, and that the seeds are not tested on all kinds of soil conditions, all kinds of elevations, and so forth. And then the seeds fail to produce as promised, then that these farmers could lose everything to pay back the loans on crops. This is one of the second order effects that we need to look at. And another is that the seeds are the intellectual property of the manufacturer. At least the manufacturers regard it that way. Yeah. So farmers who use these seeds are not free to replant every year without buying fresh seeds from the manufacturer. Okay, now let us suppose that a relatively affluent farmer lives next door to a poorer farmer who is trying to raise crops with unmodified seeds. And let's suppose that a windstorm comes up and blows the GM seeds, the genetically modified seeds, onto the land of the poorer farmer. Okay, then the manufacturer of the GM seeds sues the poorer farmer for misappropriation of intellectual property. The poorer farmer countersues for trespass. And you can guess who has the bigger, badder lawyers here. So you know how that situation is going to play out. So these, you can look at the direct effects of these technologies, but then you have to, and those are, biological and medical, but then you have to think of the social and legal scenarios that could play out as these technologies are implemented. I'll hold any comments about genetic therapies and mucking about with embryos until later in our conversation.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. We have our another speakers, Mr. Aaron. So this is your first time. If you just introduce your background with our audience and just analyze today's topic, that how do you want to analyze the genetic engineering?
Yeah, so hello everybody from Texas. My name is Aaron. I guess I was brought in this conversation as kind of more along the lines of not necessarily an average Joe, but what you would call a hobbyist on steroids. I've been interested in genetic engineering for years as a solution to a lot of diseases and species related to them. So, and these are excellent points that Professor Fred Phillips over there said. Honestly, I don't have any stating point on that. Those are all very excellent points that I myself am curious to hear a lot of answers on. So unfortunately, I got to kind of punt that one off and reserve more for the later discussions on disease-related things and things of that sort.
Thank you, Professor Donalds. How do you want to analyze today's topic? Yeah.
Well, I want to add to the list that Fred. How do you prefer to be addressed, Fred?
Fred is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I prefer Donald. The professor is kind of overstating it, because I know in some cultures you call anyone that teaches at a university a professor, but in the United States there's a hierarchy, and I haven't reached the full professor status, so I think it's more appropriate to call me Donald. Anyway, the one I want to add is that genetically modified organisms are manufacturing a lot of medicine these days. So for instance, you use genetically modified bacteria to make insulin. It's very, but the most important genetically modified organism that we might want to think about right now are the vaccines for COVID. So the new mRNA vaccines are made by, basically they took the spike proteins in the COVID, or the virus is called SARS, what is it? SARS-CoV-2, right? SARS-CoV-2, that's the name of the virus. And so what they did is they chopped out a little piece of the spike protein and they created mRNA with it. And mRNA is something that your cell produces to create proteins. Basically, a little piece of your DNA comes off, goes out into the cell's mechanisms, and it creates proteins. So what happened is they isolated this one little part, created a way of getting it inside of your cell, And so your cells themselves started manufacturing this little piece of the spike protein. It's not enough to get you sick or anything else. It's just a teeny little part of it. And because of that, your cells started manufacturing the protein, and then your immune systems learned to recognize it because it was something weird. And that was how they developed those vaccines, which have proved the mRNA vaccines have proved far more effective than the ones that were made by the normal methods. The two that were made by the normal method are the AstraZeneca in Europe and the Johnson & Johnson one here in the United States. And they're less effective, and then there's been some side effects of people getting blood clots. Extremely, extremely rare, but it has happened. So that's an example of using genetically modified organisms for extremely beneficial to us. And the whole technology of mRNA now it's brand new. This is the first vaccines that have been made that way, but it has the potential to address lots of any disease, basically. So any disease that your immune system gets involved with. There's diseases that your immune system isn't able to do anything with, like malaria. But so in any event, I'm just going to mention that one, and I will like to circle back. I will say, I'd kind of just like to throw this in Fred's lap, as it were, which is, how is it that you know that those Indian farmers killed themselves? Because actually, all of that information came from a single source, a woman whose first name I forget, but her last name was Shiva. That's easier to remember. And she just basically claimed it. It was picked up by Al Jazeera. And that one single solitary article in Al Jazeera is the reason that we believe that these Indian farmers killed themselves, because of the genetically modified organisms. But at the analysis by universities and other organizations have noted that there was a huge recession that took place at the time. The lending practices in India are fairly corrupt and not available to poor farmers. And there's a lot of reasons. According to The Economist, the genetically modified pollen has gotten all over India. People use it. It's 20 or 30 or more % now of most of the cotton that they grow. Oh yeah, one other thing that happened is the suicides took place at the same rate in parts of India that didn't grow cotton. So they simply the genetically modified cotton couldn't have been involved with it. And so there's actually no reason to believe that was true. I mean, there's just a single source, and all the evidence, there's a great deal of evidence against it, and there's very good alternative explanations. So, I mean, it may be true, but I don't have any reason to believe it's true. Okay, that's next. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Professor
Yes, Fred.
Yes, well, you'll notice that I was not trying to confirm the suicides theory. It is, I was concentrating on the aggressive marketing of the GMO providers. And you're right, the formal financing system is not available to the poorer farmers, so they go to loan sharks. So I was talking about how they get in a financial squeeze, but I stopped short of saying that I really believe about the suicides. And I saw only one article debunking the suicide theory, and I found that full of rhetorical holes also. So that leaves me unconvinced either way about the suicides. But about the conditions and the processes that could lead to despair among farmer borrowers, that seems clearer to me.
I will say I found quite a few, and some with good references. So they actually refer to papers. I found a very good article in Nature, which is a very incredibly respected journal. So, and they obviously have footnotes and they're peer reviewed and things like that. So, anyway, I can always send them to you.
All right, thanks.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Aaron, I think you want to add some point here.
Yes. Now, if I may, first of all, and again, Fred, those are all excellent points in terms of, the intellectual properties and, blow over, and those things definitely need to be addressed. But that aside, you think that genetic and sorry, I had a bit of an echo on my camera. But you think that genetic engineering actually occurs like every day on small levels all over the world, that isn't controlled by humans. You have minute mutations that will occur here and there, and over the natural course of things get blown around to these separate fields and things of that sort. But I always find it a bit odd that when we try to project a human element into it, you end up with a couple of issues. First of all, everybody freaks out. And second of all, they have good reason to, because what happened when we discovered nuclear fission? Not only that, but what happens when a breakthrough new technology comes through and it becomes so capitalized upon and commoditized that, again, as your point was, Fred, you end up with a poor guy next door to you getting sued just because one of his corn plants had an interesting color on its leaf. And that can be quite problematic. However, it ends up in a point where, like I said, who gets to make these decisions on, nature can rewrite genetic code at will and blow its seeds all around, but we don't. We don't get that ability. We can't, as some would say, God forbid, I try to make corn that's a little more cold resistant or a little more water resistant, but Mother Nature can give us things like sickle cell anemia, and we're just expected to deal with it. I suppose again, it's more of an appeal to emotion or logic than anything else. But I just find that to be interesting.
Yes, yes. Professor Fred Phillips, specifically, I just want to know two areas. Number one, biotechnology, how the genetic engineering actually implementing different kind of technology through this biotechnology. This is very important. Second thing, for Malaysia, even Malaysian governments, Singapore, they are now more focused on agriculture after the COVID. Even they are changing their policy and everything. Malaysia, specifically Malaysia and Singapore government. So what is your advice how they can utilizing this genetics engineering, especially for agriculture and agrotechnology?
Well, I want to start by saying that all these genetic technologies that we're talking about today have just tremendous benefits, medically, agriculturally, everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about it. And the benefits are plain, but the potential downsides is something that people are not skilled at assessing and dealing with. And all those downsides start with the personal, emotional, as Aaron said, and then there's political and organizational and religious aspects that have to be considered as you bring these things into implementation. And, in agriculture, in many ways, that might be the simplest arena. But when we start talking about what do they call the hybrids among species, the chimeras that people are producing in laboratories, and there's a rumor that someone even brought a monkey-human chimera to term and to birth. And then we have the shenanigans of Dr. He in China about modifying the genome of the twins in utero and then bringing them to term. So, here is one of the intercultural ethics areas, right? We consider it unethical to bring to bring genetically modified embryos to term at our present level of knowledge. In other regions of the world, they'd consider it unethical to abort such fetuses. And this is intercultural differences. It has to do with religion. And if, we've been dealing with the technological revolution of information and communication technologies for some time now. And sure, we worry about our children in ways that are relatively trivial compared to how we're going to worry about our children under the genetic revolution. We're afraid kids have too much screen time and they don't go outside and exercise enough. We're afraid that kids might be exposed to pornography or to ideas that run counter to parents' religious orientation. These are serious problems, but they are problems concerning what we do. They are not problems concerning who we are. And when we get into genetics and the possibility of, fixing genetic problems of unborn children, and then bringing them to term, or trying to improve the human race, and reawakening all those terrible, troublesome questions about eugenics. This is fundamental questions about who we are, and the emotional impact, the religious issues that are raised are going to be ever so much more serious than we've experienced with the ICT revolution. But I'm glad you say that the forefront in Malaysia is agriculture, because that's much less emotionally upsetting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Aaron.
Yes. So every time, as you stated, Fred, and that is, again, an excellent point. Every time we have a technological revolution of some sort, there's always a huge onslaught of things such as, first of all, superstition. Secondly, there are real ethical implications of these things, such as the AC versus DC conflict, between that you have between Tesla and Edison, when we first started to truly master harnessing electricity. And I'll be clear that for just everybody to be able to manipulate their genome at will is definitely a bit beyond what I think should happen. However, in controlled settings, you do see here the answers to many diseases, such as the ability to practically solve cancer within the decade if all goes well, and to solve most genetic disorders, and even some of the more interesting things I've seen, like limb regeneration, which sounds a bit absurd, to some, I'm sure, but it's not as far off as we might think. Now, again, that being said, and this is an excellent point, I don't think, 14-year-old high school students looking to get a competitive edge should be able to, make themselves 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And again, you brought up eugenics, and, and some cultural differences in ethics. And I certainly hope that we are able to make wise decisions to prevent, state eugenics programs, because that would be about as dystopian as you can get.
Thank you. Mr. Donald. Yes.
Well, I definitely agree. It's getting to be, you take a culture like China, where even today they will kill girl children. And you can start to see how if parents are given a way that they could make their kids smarter or stronger or something else like that, many of them would take it. And that's fraught with peril. That's all I can say. That might not work out. And interestingly, technology has a tendency to be normative. So if you look at things like artificial intelligence, as I was saying on an earlier show, it's what it really does. It's not intelligent in any way. What it really is it's just a statistical. They just get so much data, billions of faces, and then they create an average of them. Like, for instance, one IBM decided to classify faces by how big people's foreheads were and how far apart their eyes were. And if you get down to a micro scale, those are going to be different in everybody. And so they tried to use that information to make predictions about people. And so if you fall outside of the range, then there's this whole thing, craniology, which is the idea that by looking at people's faces, you can decide whether they're going to be criminals or not. And so in a sense, that's ridiculous, but in a sense, that's what IBM is doing. It's modern craniology. And so if you think of things, even simple things like your credit, or the likelihood that a transaction you did was credit card fraud, and your credit card gets turned off until you call them and stuff like that. All of those things are trying to force you into a narrow range. And it seems to me that the technology, right, I want to say in that case, that is devastating for people of color, for people who've had some sort of crimes in their background or things like that. They become outside of these norms that are developed by these artificial intelligence, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if somebody can't get credit, can't borrow the money, can't do anything in normal life, then they are more likely to fall into the edges of society where there's criminals and things like that. So it becomes self-fulfilling. And the people that are hurt are the people that are the least able to defend themselves, the poorest people, the people that have the least social structure that isn't as robust as somebody that, well, like me, that comes from I'm tall, white, blue-eyed. I'm the kind of person that lots of people want to be, but and that's just a shake of the genetic dice. But if people could start manufacturing their children, which they will be able to, there's no question about it. And what Aaron said, they just put A for your name. So what Aaron said was so incredible, because when I go to the science fair in Santa Clara, I'm a judge there every year. There are plenty of high school students where their experiment is genetically modifying organisms. They do things like they take the gene that causes certain bacteria to glow when you see the beautiful waves that are glowing in the dark, and they transplant that gene into some other organism so they can make some other organism glow. And we're talking about 14-year-old kids, and it's that easy to do now. So when I look at it, I worry, I wonder if they're going to start manufacturing new kinds of viruses. That's absolutely possible. So there's a very dark side to what's possible with genetic engineering. But I know I'm going on a long time, but I want to say one last thing, which is that one of the ones that people think about is BT crops. And what they did is they spliced a gene from a common soil bacteria, which manufactures a basically toxin. And that toxin has been being used for organic farming for years and years and years because it's natural. And it only affects certain very narrow range of animals. And one of the ones is corn borers. And corn borers burrow into the stems of corn, and they're very hard to get. Once they're in there, pesticides don't really affect them. and unless they're horrible, just incredibly toxic pesticides, and then they wreck the corn. So about $1 billion a year is lost to these pests, these insects, with a combination of crop loss and just and they also, once the corn has been damaged, even if it isn't, even if it's still usable, mold will get into the damaged areas. So there's mold that's in them too. And they're only toxic in a very narrow range of acidity and temperature. So that very narrow range of acidity and temperature is the gut bacteria, the guts of these particular species of insects. And so what they do is they cause their stomach to get pores in it, and that kills them. But it doesn't do anything to us. I mean, we have totally different guts and bacteria, and people have been eating it for years and years and years because they spray it on organic crops. So I think that saving of all of those resources, it cuts down pesticide use, because they don't have to use pesticides on these crops, because that particular animal isn't going to be able, that particular insect isn't going to be able to damage their crops anymore. So I think that's on the one range where it's highly beneficial. And I'm talking too much right now, but I'd like to talk about the social aspects of GMOs, which are considered poison in where I live in California by many. So that'll be interesting to talk about too. But I'm going to shut up now because I want to listen to these other people.
Yes. Thank you. Professor Fred Philip, you work with many famous research centers, even China Research Academy, and many important universities in Asia Pacific and North America. I just want to know, as a simple audience, because we have many audience from Asia Pacific, they have many questions from their side. I will take their questions, but there is a specific things, especially in the COVID-19 situation. Now everybody go for vaccinations and these things. So if you give us a clear idea how actually this vaccine process developed and how it works, how it will be helpful for the peoples, those who are getting vaccine or developing hard immunities. There are many questions from electronic media, print media. You are the key person from Tando, is a global think tank and very, very famous organization. So how do you want to analyze? How do you want to create awareness?
Okay, thank you for all the complimentary introduction there, but I'm not a biologist, not a virologist. I do want everybody to get vaccinated safely. There are a lot of skeptics out there that are refusing vaccination and standing between us and herd immunity or something close to herd immunity. There is no way that a vaccine itself is going to hurt you, to the best of my knowledge. The problem is, if and when there is a problem, it's the stuff they package the vaccines in and how they transport it. Okay, I mean, there are stories, and again, I can't confirm or refute the people getting mercury poisoning from the what do you call it? The stuff they put around the.
It's a preservative.
The preservative. Thank you. Yes, and vaccines that have to be kept refrigerated, and what if you doubt the efficacy of the refrigeration on the route between the manufacturer and you? Okay, I can see these problems, or there's reasons for people resisting, but if you have confidence in the distribution chain, by all means get the vaccination. So that's I have to say, my layman's advice. There's, as Donald said, lots of variation among human populations, and making mistakes with this variation. It's not always the fault of AIs. I used to work with the guy who invented the pulse oximeter. You know, the thing you put on the end of your finger to get the oxygen content of your blood without actually drawing blood. It's been in the news lately because it was, you know, initially only tested on people with light skin, and it definitely what does it do? Underestimates the amount of oxygen in the blood of dark-skinned people when you take. And they test this by, you know, taking a drop of blood immediately after the pulse oximeter measures it, and they compare the two measurements. So, you know, we all need to get more knowledgeable and actionable about how medical technologies affect different human populations differently. And some of that is has to be dealt with AIs, but some of it is just, you know, pure human stupidity and testing things only on you know, college sophomores in American universities and thinking that it applies to everybody. So this is a big problem. One of you mentioned artificial viruses. I'm trying to learn more about this now because, well, yeah, they'll be easy to make because the cost of of um, what do you call it? Reading genomes is coming
CRISPR,
down.
yeah. Oh, well,
Not
CRISPR edits them, yeah.
Yeah, but the reading of them, the mapping of them, that cost has come down much more sharply than the cost of semiconductors has come down according to Moore's law. This is, you know, supra Moore's law for genetics, and so of course, yeah, high school kids can muck around with the genomes of simple organisms. Um, but you know, I'm interested in from the perspective of genetic therapies, and again, they've cured diseases, big benefits, and if I focus on the downsides, it's only because that's my profession. You know? So there's two kinds of genetic therapies. When you modify the genes of germ cells, which are heritable by the next generation, and it's easy to see how they propagate themselves. But there's also gene therapies on somatic non-germ cells, and you think, well, how can that happen? You imagine somebody taking tiny tweezers and, you know, doing the CRISPR thing on every one of your body cells, and obviously that doesn't happen. So the way you do genetic therapy on somatic cells is by building an artificial virus that ultimately infects a significant number of the non-reproducing cells. And you think, what could go wrong? So I worry about that, at least to the extent that I want to learn much more about it.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a specific question from audience. I want to ask everyone a question. Mr. Aaron, Ali Ahmed, thank you for your question. What is the career path of a genetic engineer? So there are many youth actually come as an audience in World Talent Economy Forum show. So what is your advice? What will be the career path for young talented people?
So really, I suppose it depends on how formal and how well respected you want to be. At this point, as was already discussed, you know, you can absolutely learn genetic engineering off of Google if you'd like, and go buy a kit and try to hack it yourself. And you might even make some big breakthroughs. What I would recommend, however, is seeking out universities, going and taking these courses in biology and you know, and in genetics and all these things, so that you have a firm understanding of exactly what it is you were doing. And once you complete that, I'm sure that in the coming future, there will be a lot of internships offered by, you know, larger firms, larger companies all over the world. Because this is, you know, you have something at your fingertips that, though admittedly can get out of hand is able to cause some of the blind to see and some of the crippled to walk, as it were. So I think to clarify the career path is to absolutely go to a school, preferably one that is an authority on these matters, and to study under people and to seek out information from people who are actively in this field. And once you build your own knowledge base, seek out these firms that are already doing this sort of development, and try to score an internship with one of them. However, again, if you'd like to, you can always just get a basic CRISPR kit online at this point right now, and try to figure it out yourself. However, I think that moving into the future, we might kind of realize why that's more of a bad idea as opposed to more of a standard model. Now, I'm all for the backyard mechanic of many different things. However, I think this is one of those things that one should aspire to become a professional on before tampering with.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, there is another question from Noor Fazrin. Thank you, Noor Fazrin, for your question. How do a person can prevent certain disease which come from genetically? So,
well, right now there's a disease called cystic fibrosis, and it's basically causes the people's lungs to not be able to clear the fluids that are in their lungs that are used for cleaning your lungs, and it just builds up in them. And there's therapies that are have been around, but mostly they don't live past 30 or so at the long side. But now there's new therapies that cause some of the gene to wake up some of the genes and express themselves. And it's like Fred said, they don't reproduce and get all through the body. So the people have to use an inhaler that causes the cells directly to be able to produce that. But it's working. It's getting these people so that they can live normal lives. And I think that's an example of something that's really just absolutely fantastic. I just want to briefly say that a lot of medicine is made by genetic engineering, but it's indirect. What they do is they take bacteria and they do the same thing that I was talking about. They teach the bacteria to make certain proteins, and these proteins, like insulin, is made up of proteins. So they can teach the cells how to manufacture medicines. So aim for working for Gilead or Pfizer or one of these companies. They snap you up. But I also want to say that our electrician, we just remodeled our house, dropped out of a genetic engineering program at Stanford, and now he's an electrician. So you never know where your career path is going to go.
Yes. There is another question I want to take for Professor Fred Philip Onikashams. Thank you for your questions. What are genetically modified organisms and GM foods? I think you discussed some point, but yeah.
I think all of us mentioned this at one point or another. And again, I'm not the authoritative source on this, but if we have always done genetic modification through crossbreeding and so forth before the age of CRISPR and so forth. So we have always, for example, taken an animal that produces a lot of food, and if we're living up in the mountains, crossbreeding with a subspecies that persists better at high altitudes to come up with an animal that has the characteristics we want. So this is genetic modification in the sense that the questioner is asking, is just doing this not by traditional reproductive processes, but by taking those little tweezers, which we now call CRISPR, and changing the actual DNA sequence of a crop, for example, to make it thrive with less water, or to make it produce bigger kernels or whatever. We've discovered what gene causes the bigger kernels or the greater water resistance, and we've injected it into the seed to create the kind of crop that we want.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron, especially as we have many youth communities here, so how we can create different kind of awareness program for genetic engineering, and how we can develop better ecosystem, like do more scientific research, and with the collaboration of corporations and governments, and electronic media and print media also can produce more informations and report on this point. What is your advice?
So for me personally, I found resources such as Google Scholar to be very informative on these matters, and to be kind of the host of a lot of collaboration between individuals and larger scientific organizations. As far as awareness goes, I don't think there can be enough awareness on this subject, and because an AI or people, whatever, is only as good as the database of information you're referencing. So as this information is posted more and more readily available, you're going to have a lot more collaboration. I also find it humbling in a way that companies such as Netflix are starting to release documentaries on the subject. Which, by the way, if you guys haven't seen it, there's one called Unnatural Selection that is it's phenomenal, and it's very unbiased. I feel it definitely presents both the concerns and the benefits. And so long as we keep pushing forward, understanding both the concerns and benefits, then I don't think any amount of information is going to be too much on this matter. I would like to see some more initiatives like the very one that you're doing right now with this particular show, like what Netflix is doing. I'd like to see, and you will see this, just like the FBI contracts out to backyard hackers and stuff like that. I would like to see more and more of the underground movement become incorporated with some of the more official channels, and hopefully kind of equalize out here. Now, of course, this is in a perfect world. So moving forward, I would really like to see a larger, almost like a breaking down in the scientific community to realize that there are going to be, these college freshmen or sophomores, there are going to be some backyard mechanics, as I like to say, who actually might have unprecedented information in this field, and to see some sort of a unified resource to where, almost like an internet-based think tank or a single site. And if this exists, I would like to know about it. But something of that sort, I think, is going to make leaps and bounds of progress.
Thank you. Mr. Donalds.
Well, I have soundly agree with Fred about the idea that we've been genetically modifying things forever, which is completely true. I mentioned that I'd talk a little bit about the genetic organisms people being very, very afraid of them, some people. And if you read and dig into what they're saying, is that basically what they're saying is we don't know what could possibly happen, so we shouldn't do it. And we don't, even though there's been millions and millions and millions of people eating genetically modified organisms, and there isn't a rise in cancer. Actually, cancer overall has been going down, at least especially in the developed world, because people are eating better and things like that. But it's not, there's no evidence whatsoever that genetically modified, corn is causing people's health problems for people. So I would suggest that people learn more about it, and kind of that's a good example of something where education is really, really important, because when people learn about it, they would come to realize that, well, that's been in plants forever. We've been eating that stuff forever. They just took it from one place and put it someplace else, and it's not a problem. I want to say one thing that people should really be aware of is that right now the climate is changing more rapidly than almost any time in the history of the planet. And one of the consequences of this rapid climate change is that areas where crops have traditionally been grown will lose their ability to be able to grow the kind of crops. So if we wait for natural evolution to take place, we're in a kind of a weird bind, because evolution is a very slow process. And the climate change that we're having right now is an extremely rapid process. So the kinds of thing that Fred was talking about being able to create crops that use less water, can be more heat resistant, all these kinds of things are, I think, essential to keeping the human race alive and thriving. I think that genetic engineering is basically not, one of the pillars of what's going to allow us to be able to continue to be alive and thrive on this planet. So it has its potential downsides, but it's also the key to our survival.
Thank you, Professor Fred Philip.
Oh, yes, I totally agree. It's one of the pillars of our survival. There is a trust issue. Let me start with far afield with a story about cars. Especially people my age remember very fondly the days when everything that happened inside an automobile was mechanical. And we could go in there with a screwdriver and fix it. It's what you saw was what you got. And it was very plain how everything worked. And with just the minimum of education, you could fix cars. Now everything in a car is electronic. You don't know what it does. You don't know to whom it's reporting your driving habits. And we approach our cars with more suspicion than we used to, even though they're very much more efficient than they used to be. Okay, so 100 years ago in America, there were a lot of people we called snake oil salesmen, and they would sell these bottles of so-called medicine that they claimed would cure everything from hangnails to cancer. And the average person, it was a con, of course, in most cases, but the average person didn't have access to an analytical chemist and didn't have the wherewithal to pay a chemist to analyze this stuff. So, it was just a trust issue, and people lost trust when it didn't work. That's why they call it snake oil instead of medicine. A lot of the companies that provide us with pharmaceuticals these days and are getting into genetic engineering are the same companies that manufactured the poisons used in the death camps in World War II. How do we get the trust? The average person is not going to be able to analyze these products and be able to assure themselves of safety. You just have to have the trust. So, yes, I surely agree with you, Donald, about education, but trust is another hurdle. And if companies would just engage in the least little bit of corporate social responsibility and do things that build trust among the customer base, then this would move the matter forward in a more satisfactory way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. Before that, I just want to add some point, because this month, 29th and 30th May, we have our summit on futuristic leaderships. So many famous people from around the world, famous scholars from North America, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia Pacific, from South Asia, Middle East, they are joining in World Talent Economy Forum Summit. So I invite you all in our summit as a speaker, even as an audience. And for developing the summit and different kind of academia and research related works, we need our volunteers. So those who are observing our shows, please join with us as a volunteers. And if you have your own write-ups, especially I request the speakers, you can share with us, because we want to go for the publications and other things. So your your engagement with World Talent Economy Forums is very important, because we are working with 100 different countries, especially developing nations. They are also supporting our initiative, and we are also collaborating with different governments, corporations, universities, and we want to make a real life contributions with knowledge-based work. So we are developing a knowledge-based community. So like Professor Fred Philip, Mr. Aaron, Professor Donalds, everybody's contribution is very, very important for us. And definitely we will change our world with the global collaboration. That is important. So your knowledge, your contribution, everything is important for World Talent Economy Forum. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. So I want to start from Mr. Donald, then Mr. Aaron, and finally, Professor Fred Philip.
I want to say something I've said before on the show, and because I think it's so important, and it's basically bouncing off of something Fred just said. One of the difficulties that we have in the world is has to do with corporation. Now, I'm not a person that's anti-corporation. Corporations are ways for people to to basically join together and create financing, so that rather than an individual, you can come up with things that have more than one individual. However, in the 20th century, we kept asking the question, how is it that we're going to measure success? When somebody does a project, how is that project successful? How do we know that this corporation is successful? How do we know that the next genetically engineered product that we made is successful? And there's exactly one way that most corporations measure that, is how much money they make. And so that can get you into a bind where making money overrides the ethical concerns that we have. And some of our biggest crashes, economic crashes, the one in when the Russians defaulted and we had an economic crash, then that was because of a financial instrument called what is it? Well, I don't remember right now, and then of course the 2007 crash was a financial instrument that they were using to bundle mortgages together. And then all of those are purely financial, but they're a symptom of a larger problem. And I hope that everybody that learns about genetic engineering and gets into genetic engineering tends towards the idea of how it can be helpful to people, and really looks inside themselves, and especially asks others, like goes out, because you don't know everything yourself. You'll never know everything yourself, not even a micro part of what there is to know. So being connected to other people is really a key to being able to develop some sort of an ethical sense. And I've said that that's my research is really in actually the sociology of relationships. So I want to mention that you've got to always think about how it's going to affect other people and other plants and animals and the world itself. Monoculture is a problem with genetically engineered organisms. You wind up having this crop that's so incredibly good that it completely pushes out every other crop. But the random diversity of evolution is actually good. So we don't want to stop that. So there's a lot of both concerns and incredible advantages. It's like I said, one of the pillars of our survival is genetic engineering. And so it's a wonderful and exciting topic. And as Aaron said, there's a lot of good information on the internet. Maybe my topic at the conference the summit will be how to decide what information is good and what information is bad, because that's one of the biggest problems that people have. There's a lot of really bad information as well as good information, and sorting it out is one of the most important things you can do in your life.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Aaron.
You're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yes, and I hate to step back here, but on the subject of what exactly is a GMO crop, I always find it funny when I go to a supermarket and I see non-GMO on corn. Corn is inherently, by my book, a genetically modified organism. It never existed in nature. It was refined from maize, which was refined from a crop called teosinte. And so to see non-GMO corn is an oxymoron to me. Yeah, we've been eating GMOs for centuries. But to move on from there, a lot of the unintended effects come from CRISPR used to be the best thing we had to go in and make these incisions and to insert new genomes. But compared to some of the new techniques that are coming out, it's a bit sloppy. One of the ones that I've found that's really going to help clean up these loose ends moving forward is Retron library recombinering. And though I don't have the time to get into the depth of its mechanisms today, I really implore people to do their own independent research on that, because it is that independent research that's going to push us forward and is going to build the databases necessary to be able to do this a lot more cleanly and to be able to do it a lot more intelligent. Because again, even if we were to factor in AI to this stuff, which we should, it's only ever going to be as good as its database. And that's all I've got.
Thank you. Professor Fred Philip, what's your concluding remarks for today? Yes.
You're muted.
The big problem, climate change, definitely one of them, nuclear proliferation, another of these things could kill us all. And the role, you brought up the role of connection, and our connection with other people lets us solve problems better as we bring more brain power and varied perspectives to the problem. And yet, as the world's population increases and more people live close together in cities, and the different technologies that we have, ICT and power tools, and now high school kids with genetic engineering, everything we do is more likely to impinge on somebody else's backyard, right, or their prerogatives. And when that happens, I mentioned a couple farmers living close to each other and suing each other over GMOs. We don't want to all respond to this greater frequency of impinging on each other with lawsuits, because we'll be spending all our time in courtrooms as the final climate crisis approaches and the world ends, and wouldn't we feel stupid then? So we have to find a way to, say that legal challenges are not the answer to all these technology engendered conflicts, and find ways to address the underlying problems that are not litigation. I mean, other than litigation. So thank you. That's my.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining today's session. Today's session actually really important. I request all of our audience, those who are supporting World Talent Economy Forum initiative, share our content as much as possible. Share with your government, share with your corporation, share with your classroom. Through this process, you will learn a lot. And most important thing is that you have to subscribe our YouTube channels, because your support is very important for World Talent Economy Forum. Hopefully, after this COVID-19 situation, we will arrange a lot more offline summit and academy. And hopefully, the best scholar like Professor Fred Philip, Professor Donald, Mr. Aaron, everybody, like 300 different organizations, they already join in World Talent Economy Forum. Everybody will join with us, and we will work together. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, and take care.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you.